everybody?
Good.
Wait, yeah.
You're here. Yeah, the next question is where is everybody? But I'll just leave that out for a
We
moment.
don't know yet.
Let's see, there are a few things to announce. One of those is go to the information things if you're doing any kind of review. So sign up when it happens. That's the other thing to announce. Yes, I had the opening to go to. Go to an opening tonight at the arcade of Alexandra Arshkinskaya, or I'm glad she's not here to hear me butcher the name. But that's tonight at 6, Gary?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, I'm very pleased.
Christina Schmiegel tomorrow night.
And Christina Schmiegel tomorrow night at Bruno David. And Patricia Olnick and a few other people. That was, thank you.
At Bruno.
At Bruno David. Yeah, pleased to introduce Brady Smith. He is professor and the lead chair of visual arts at St. Charles Community College. He has an MFA from the University of Chicago, BFA from Boston University, and ESC, and Brady Smith.
All right, thank you. Glad to be here. So, Jeff, I was here in, I think, November of 2006 and gave a lecture. I remember quite well. And I was reviewing some of my notes from that, and the theme of that was not so much me, but was why abstraction, or does abstraction still matter? And I'm happy to say, from my experience, that it has not gone away as a force in the art world. In fact, I think it's kind of been revived. So I thought I'd address that. The theme of this talk really has to do more with the mark and my work, because I've been reviewing that, having reached this age of 58 come Monday, having been on a sabbatical last semester, and having a lot more time to think about what I am and what I'm doing as a painter. And reflecting upon my history, realizing that the mark has been such an important facet of what I do, and maybe I took that for granted, so I thought I'd address that in this talk today. But I thought I'd also go back to some of those questions that came up in that lecture from 2006, and a few thoughts. We are allowed nowadays, I believe, and I say that term kind of loosely, to create in any particular style or form, despite what trends might be taking place in different parts of the globe. So contemporary art world philosophy, I'm not so sure is pervasive as it once was, or maybe I'm just not in touch. I don't think we should ever abandon standards of excellence or cease from posing questions about what art is or what good art is. That's always been more important to me, I think, what is good. Because I don't really know if I care if it's art or not. That's not that relevant to me. Because it might be what you think it is and what I think it is not the same thing. And I have a note here that I showed a slide of Damien Hirst's cows that were floating, as well as the dead sharks. You might be familiar with that. As far as I'm concerned, what I do, abstraction allows for me fewer restrictions than realism, which is where I started. I think that you have to still give the idea that what you're producing is resembling something in the natural world if you are a realist. As far as performance art is concerned, video art installation, they are dependent upon a specific intellectual or physical and or technological set of tools. That does not enter into my practice whatsoever. I wonder if conceptual art would even exist at all if it wasn't for abstraction. And the fact that abstraction challenged people to think about what art was, and then it could be something else down the road. So Duchamp, as you probably know, his ready-mades might not have existed if it wasn't for Cubist, because Cubism, he was a Cubist for a while. So that was a thought that I had. So if you're talking about mark making, I guess you can just start with Lascaux, right? the impulse to create some image, a likeness in the world has been around for a long, long time. And it still fascinates me to think that somebody wanted to do this, you know, and it was going to represent something important to them. And as artists, we can look at, oh, look at that beautiful line, and look how that overlaps over there, you know, and this is a perfect example of a spatial device. But it's really quite an elegant set of marks. And it does not look to me like they went over it and erased it, went over it, took their chamois, you know, used charcoal, right, Sarah? So you just nailed it, and that's pretty impressive stuff. So that's one kind of mark. Now I jump forward because I have to share the fact that I saw this drawing as well as many other Michelangelo drawings at the Cleveland Museum back in the fall because I was on sabbatical. I did a residency in Ohio. And this was quite a treat because I've been looking at these drawings for all my life in books, so to actually see them was quite remarkable. So what am I looking at as an artist, as a person who loves to draw? I still draw from the figure. I teach figure drawing. How does this enter into abstraction? Well, you know, it's a section that you could look at and not necessarily know what it is. It just appeals to you because of those set of marks. And with these great masters from the Renaissance and the Baroque, it is a great experience to really take in the beauty of what this is as a result of a multitude of marks. I think this is why we still look at these people and admire them so much. So that's Michelangelo drawing, and there it was, you know, set up. And this was the figure. There's a preliminary study for that figure right there. So I'm just kind of jumping around art historically. These are things that I like. Does anybody know who did this? This is just a detail of a painting. Northern European artist.
Franz Hals.
Yes, thank you. So, look at that. You know? And I point out to my students that, you know, you lay that mark in correctly, you're going to get that likeness. Your brush strokes and your pencil, your charcoal marks don't have to be smooth and blended and perfect. Just lay it in there with conviction. And that, to me, is important in my work. And I think when that shows up in your painting, whether you do realism or abstraction, whatever you do, that conviction matters. That really means something. And that's part of you. So the mark is your signature. The mark is the signature. And speaking again of teaching, I encourage the students to just take that leap and not be so afraid and timid. Just dive right in. Trust that you won't lose your sense of self if you follow my direction. You're always going to be in the work. You have a signature. Just like when you write something down and write your checks or whatever. So Franz Hals, 17th century. Big leap, okay. Turner, English artist, 19th century, and you know, he's not lumped into abstraction because there was no abstract art per se, but you cannot not look at him and wonder, well, is this suggestive of something other than something specific? And we know that this is a ship and it's in the ocean and there's all this narrative, and he did stuff like that. You know, he did the burning of the Houses of Parliament after the fact. It tells a story, so the narration is still there. However, does the impact of the mark create a sense of atmosphere, mood? And the answer, of course, is yes, and that's what I think people respond to. They go, ooh, you know. So I like emotion in painting, and I think my work has that. It's a little hard when you're the artist to specifically pinpoint aspects of your work and say, well, this is this emotion, that it's something much broader. You know, it's just the impact that you have when you respond to certain kinds of art. It's all visceral. And you know this one, of course. So here's the broken mark, Claude Monet's Impression Sunrise, supposedly the term Impressionism is derived from this painting. And at the time that it came out, I could see how people would find this outrageous, that this couldn't be a legitimate painting. It's just a bunch of scratchy, scrawly marks, and where's the form, where's the space, and that was what was valued in the academies. And Monet and Renoir, of course, go outside, and this is the first impression. And it's enough because they were so masterful at drawing and painting and looking at the world, they realized, well, this is enough. And they were trying to do a lot of other things that were new, and they were quite radical. And I think that this is, you know, the beginning of modernism as we know it, and this is what gave us abstraction. Again, not unlike what I said before, yes, the Michelangelo figure is supposed to be realistic, but if you look at certain sections, you crop whatever, you appreciate the mark, it might be suggestive of something else, or you feel a certain way about it that's unique to what your needs are as a viewer. You can go and you take sections of this painting, you crop it, and I can probably pull out dozens of examples of different kinds of paintings over the last 100 years, specifically abstract paintings, and say, oh, that's like that section there. So, it is really radical. I was just talking to Jeff about the Linda Benglis photograph in the art forum and how remarkable it must have been for the newness and the shock of these kinds of feminist theories in art and the images itself and challenging sexuality and the male and female gender roles. And I think we're kind of numb to it, at least I am. And I think we're numb to Impressionism. Impressionism is probably the most popular form of painting out there. You put an Impressionist exhibit at a museum, and I'm sure it's a moneymaker. But you have to remember that people were shocked by this and thought, you know, this is horrible. I mean, what critics thought that a pregnant woman would miscarry upon the sight of an Impressionist painting because it was so horrific. So a few others that are obvious in terms of the mark. It's Van Gogh, which would never existed without Monet in the post-Impressionist period. But I respond to these because of the landscape, because I got my start sort of as a landscape painter, if you will. So I don't think I'm ever going to not appreciate that idea of the space and the color and the light, because that's so important to what I do. And I hope that you see some of these themes in my work, even if it's not direct, because I've never copied a Van Gogh, I've never copied a Seurat. And it's remarkable how different they really are in terms of their execution, even though there's the broken mark. These probably took a long time to produce. These not so much, definitely not this so much. We know how prolific Van Gogh could be in those bouts of those manic periods. But this was very methodical. How many thousands of marks are on that surface? And have you all been to Chicago, seeing the Seurat, the afternoon of, Sunday afternoon, and that's massive. And then of course Cezanne, another one, apparently took a long time with his work, even though people at first sight might think, well, that was probably really easy to do. That's not a legitimate form of painting. But the mark is so crucial. And the legend was that, you know, 20 minutes between brush strokes, and he did a lot of thinking. And I can relate to that. I probably overthink. And without Cezanne, of course, we wouldn't have Cubism. And Cubism does not appeal to me in terms of the color, because it's all round and all umber. But I'm fascinated that somebody would want to completely try to transform the concept of painting from what happened in the Renaissance, which is, you know, this is the world that we see around us, and I'm trying to put that on a flat two-dimensional surface. That's all illusory. We're illusionists, artists, painters. And how can I interpret space and form from a multitude of perspectives all at the same time? And I think it's really possible, at least in the attempt, it really radicalized what we could do with painting. And back to the mark, I'm not an expert in Cubism, so I'm not sure why these strokes are this way and how it relates to the lines and the fragmentation and the geometry so much. But I think it was a way of suggesting a more volumetric approach to certain forms that he was trying to depict in this scene, but like the fragmentation, the broken mark of Impressionism, we have dash, dash, dash. So he hasn't really left that concept behind of the mark that was found in Impressionism. think of the scale of this work, which adds to the impact of the mark. Have any of you seen any of his big paintings, like at MoMA or Met? You really are involved. Yeah, you can see. Apart from the older folks. It's like Monet's water lilies. You really are enveloped in it, and of course, you know, the painting we have at the museum. It's really amazing. So how was this produced? This is not with a brush. I guess some of you probably know. Anybody? The specifics of how it was produced? Not a brush.
The canvas is put on the floor.
Yes, sir. Well, he would just take sticks, you know, paint sticks or dried out brushes, goes into the can, and boom, boom, boom. Yeah, he did use some brushes, but a lot of it was just the stick. So he's just walking around, flipping that. What's amazing is that he got so good at it. You know, people say, oh, it's just a mess, it's chaotic. No, somebody did this analysis. I don't know if any of you ever read that article. I think it was some physicists or mathematicians, and they realized that his rhythm and his placement was as perfect as nature. Might have just been a bunch of BS, but I thought that was pretty interesting. I thought it was a very convincing argument, you know, that because he wanted to be nature, so he according to this theory, he hit it, yeah.
He had a beautiful statement. I had to take the body, no, I had to take the figure out of painting in order to put the body back in.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see it.
I thought it'd be interesting to put in Giacometti, because he was a sculptor. And if you know his work, the texture, the bumpiness, in a way it really is a mark, isn't it? Because the fingers. So it's a different way to do it. He's the only sculptor that I can think of who's like this. You know, it's all this, you know, building up, breaking it down. And with the painting, and we do have a really nice Giacometti in the museum, by the way. Get up really close and look at the faces. You can't believe how many marks there are. It's like this swirl that's built. So you can see how he was a sculptor, like if he was winding wire or a rope or string and just going around and around until it builds up and builds up, or maybe taking it down and down and down. So what I also respond to, which again, you know, bear with me here as you look at my work, is just sort of the energy in it, you know, the spirit. The propulsion. And this idea that he's going to get there eventually. He's not too self-conscious, so he's not like Cezanne, you know, 20 minutes. Okay, some other things to think about. Anybody know this painter? This is a huge painting. Yeah, he says Frankenthaler. I say Frankenthaler. Helen Frankenthaler, New York School painter. How was this executed? You guys know anybody?
Was it like pouring?
Yes, exactly. So acrylic paint is poured out. So what's interesting, speaking about Frankenthaler and Pollock, you know, at some point they must have just known exactly how to control it. It's like when you pull back the canvas when it's at an angle so it doesn't drip any further, how far do you want that to spread? And of course there was this randomness and this sense of chance. And so I think that's interesting too. You could say, well, you're in control if it's in your hand. But if you're not thinking about it, then what's controlling is maybe more unconscious, subconscious. But it's interesting how, no matter how you approach the mark, I think the brain probably controls a lot of this. And I respond to this because it's the color field painting and it's suggestive of the landscape. There's another way to make a painting. Dip somebody in paint, drag them around a canvas. This is Yves Klein. He's known for his blue paintings. I didn't put any of his paintings in there. I thought this would be more impactful. And again, now that I'm looking at this, I'm thinking of the conversation like I just mentioned with Jeff. And, you know, this is the 60s, I think 1964. It's been very outrageous, you know, not only that people would be publicly performing something in the nude, but the whole concept, well, this isn't art, is it? So it's the artifact, I think. Isn't that what matters the most? The artifact? How about this guy? He's standing in front of his work. Can you guys tell what that is? Those are not paint marks.
They're cuts.
Yeah, they're cuts. That's Lucio Fontana. He was Argentinian, Italian. I throw this guy in here. This is Jean-Paul Riopel. He's French-Canadian. Not a lot of people know him. We have one of his pieces at the museum that was exhibited for the first time. I've never seen it before. It's really thick, juicy painting. He used the palette knife. He was the partner, boyfriend of Joan Mitchell for a number of years. Okay, this one was not done with a brush either. This is considered an abstract painting by Andy Warhol. And if you know Andy Warhol, you're probably used to seeing images that are photographs that have been screen printed, silk screen printed on no canvas. This seems to have nothing to do with that. This is his oxidation paintings. Does anybody know how he produced these? Mike was
Urine.
urine, that's right. He had people urinate on gold paint canvases, so interesting. On the floor, I find it ironic that Warhol, who seems to be the antithesis of the abstract expressionist movement in Pollock, has people urinating, spraying, splattering onto a canvas, and then it forms that. It's not really that radical of a departure. I don't know why he thought of it. I don't know enough about it. I just thought that's pretty interesting. Not a lot of people know about it. Maybe the art world doesn't want people to know about it. You know, they only want the Marilyn Monroes and the Death Series and whatever sells and Jackie Kennedy. You know, I like this. I like this more than his later work. I don't like his later work that much. And then, of course, I think this is incredibly clever. Maybe it's very obvious at this point, but again, talk about rejecting abstract expressionism, but sort of emboldening the viewer with the image of the brush stroke, you know. And of course, this brush stroke was done like this and probably took him 2 weeks, you know, right? It's very mechanical. So I like, you know, a lot of very ironic art that's done really well and it might have some humor in it. This is Roy Lichtenstein, by the way, a contemporary of Andy Warhol. And I saw this in Indiana. This is the Newfields Museum in their sculpture courtyard. And if you're wondering why I'm showing you this, this is a Roy Lichtenstein. He took his brushstroke and made monumental sculptures out of them, which is very clever. So, how is the mark transformed into different media, and for what reasons? And the other person who I feel is completely misunderstood with people who don't really know a lot about art is Richter, because I think his use of the mark was meant to be ironic, and I don't think it was necessarily meant to embrace the idea of the Franz Klein and the Willem de Kooning of the 50s, whatever. It does it, but it doesn't. Because if you've seen how he works in their videos on YouTube, some of it is not this, you know, it's taking that squeegee and pushing it, and there's the randomness, and I met a guy many years ago, a ceramicist, he says to me, oh, your work's phenomenon-based. I was like, what does that mean? You know, well, he was a ceramicist, and what came out of the kiln with all the glazes, it was the phenomenon-based. It was, who knew what was going to happen? So, you know, Richter changes his work, but this is guys doing photorealist paintings. It's very, the intention is very clear, and in his work, no matter what the imagery is. So I think this is one, if I dare say, one of the more interesting conceptual artists of the last 50 years, and I responded to this because I just responded to sensuous qualities of the material. So other ways of thinking about the mark that have been prevalent in our society, graffiti, except for us older folks, none of you have probably ever seen actual graffiti in New York City on a subway car because it doesn't really exist anymore. When I first went there, I was 14, and exactly what it looked like. You know, and it was just, you accepted it. That's what it was. It was everywhere. And New York is all gentrified now. But where did it end up? This is a fragment of a painting. You probably know Basquiat. And you probably know Keith Haring. And they were really responding to all that. That was their environment. Their work was very urban. So let's just stop and think. I've been showing you marks from different eras. This is the 80s. He died of a heroin overdose in the 80s. So, I mean, that to me doesn't seem like a long time ago, but I guess it really is. Does anybody know Janine Antoni's work? It's called
They will on Mondays.
Oh,
Queued up
okay.
in my class.
Preview. I won't say too much. I'll let Jeff tell you about it. This is called Gnaw, and of course, if you read that, it's 2 600-pound cubes, 1 chocolate, 1 of lard. She gnawed at it with her mouth. I think that's also kind of interesting as a concept of what the mark is. So again, what I said earlier, I guess it doesn't really matter the execution. What is the end result? I'm fine with the end result. I love this piece. I find this to be one of the more clever, and I shouldn't just say clever, I mean, I think it's really good, conceptual, and also a performative piece. I'm very particular because I'm a painter, and a lot of stuff just kind of goes over my head, or I think, what is it? And I told you in the beginning, I had a talk here in 2006, and I think it was a conversation we were having, Jeff, with just the students, and you said, I'm not interested in the optical, I'm interested in the idea, and I just kind of, like, why? You know? And, I mean, in that moment, I was like, wow, so that's your impulse. It's the complete opposite of mine, you know? But I really like that because, again, it is very much the concept, the idea, but I like the execution, I like the optics of it. You know? This is Katerina Gross, you might know her. She spray paints spaces and rooms and objects, and it's huge, large scale. And I just find it, again, fascinating how we haven't really gotten away from brushstrokes or color, abstract expressionism, whatever. People find it really appealing. So I was saying earlier how, that's a really selfie, how, I lost my train of thought. But anyway, the mark is in my work even as a younger artist. And I went to Boston University, we worked for the model, and the brushstroke was very important, how you laid that brushstroke in, you know. I think I was always pretty good with space. I think the one compliment I got from my teacher all year, Professor K, was this series. The space is amazing. Oh, all right, I got a compliment. And even in my drawings, I know, Sarah, sorry to call you out. Are my marks still there? Does it look like mine? I look at that, it's like, that really looks like my drawing that I was 21. You know?
I would say.
Okay.
I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not just saying that to be part of the lecture.
You can-
No, after being in a class with you, I would say definitely you have a mixture of that soft mark, but it's all about the texture, and then you have those thick marks that kind of emphasize certain areas that you feel need more texture.
Well, I'm showing you this because I've been teaching figure drawing this semester. I hadn't done it in a while, and I've been doing it like Tuesday nights at the Artist Guild. I took a class. And so, I just was looking at what I was doing, like, wow, I'm still doing the same thing. That's why I wanted to talk about this today. And maybe it relates to something that you guys are doing or have been taught. That's where I'm going with the theme. This was an artist I really was impacted by, admired. This was Edvard Munch. You all know the Scream. Again, speaking of marks, which is the swirl kind of thing, and the reason why the marks are so important in the Scream, because you get the sense that he is screaming and it's like sound waves, right? Another artist that influenced me tremendously was John Singer Sargent. This is called the Artist Studio, which I thought was funny because I painted my kitchen when I got out of Boston University. But the mark is a big part of what he did. And Edward Hopper was a big influence on me, and I loved his landscape. So when I got out of school, I wanted to be like him, I guess. And he did a lot of Paris paintings, or paintings in Paris that were kind of small scale. So I got an easel, and I went outside. I had my '68 Dodge Dart, threw everything in the trunk, and this was the pump station at Chestnut Hill Reservoir in from my house, Academy Hill Road in Brighton Center, and look at the mark. And I gotta tell you, I didn't have a philosophy or any intention, that I was conscious of. So, again, back in signature, I think that these things just come out. So, you get out of school, guys, what are you gonna do for money? So I was a bartender, and I worked in galleries, and knocked down walls, and put walls up, and worked in a bookstore, which is kind of a cool thing to do when you're in Boston. And so then, I don't know why, I guess you just want to change. I was really into the whole essence of forms, and Brancusi, I saw a Brancusi show, I think at MoMA, like 85 or 86. I was still, really young. And that made an impact on me, and I started looking at people like Milton Avery, and again, something much more simple. So that had influenced me, and this is one of my paintings, although it seems like I still couldn't get away from the mark, even though I was trying to mimic this painting to a great extent. But what's more important, I think, to discuss is that my marks led me to shape, and that's such a big, a large facet of what I do. So I think that, my shapes that I create might be very suggestive of other things, people, other forms of nature. Another artist that influenced me after Avery was Wolf Kahn, because I think I became a colorist at this point in time, once I got into my 30s. This is a painting from around the time I was about 31 when I did this. Those other two were I was about 30 years old. I'm 58 on Monday. And I just realized, I gotta explore color. I'm just feeling locked into this whole idea of landscape, and even though they're kind of abstract, teetering, I need to be more expressive. So I just gave all that up, landscape, whatever, and I found this quote in the book, and it's The Artist's Way. I highly recommend it. It came out in the early 90s. I still open it up occasionally. Julia Cameron. She's got a lot of quotes in the book. This one I thought was really important to me at the time. Yeah. Lose your fear of being wrong. Don't censor yourself. So some of the artists that had a lot of influence me at this time, and still do, were Hans Hofmann, Willem de Kooning. We got a great de Kooning at, there was a great de Kooning at WashU. Howard Hodgkin, Frank Auerbach, Richard Diebenkorn, of course. He was big when I was in college because he did not only his landscapes, but he had his figures, and then he had his Ocean Park series. And Joan Mitchell. And there's going to be a Joan Mitchell show this year. I think we'll go see it. It's going to be starting in Baltimore. The show they had at the Whitney O2 was amazing. And this is me, so I was clearly, I think, letting the drips come in. But I think that you can still see that the landscape is still important to me. And I think my Wolf Kahn influence was showing up as well. So that's probably about the actual size of that piece. And it was at this time I had begun my association with the Dwayne Reed Gallery. He's still in business. And I only point that out because these were in the first show I had with him. And it was the first time I really started thinking about, selling art, like maybe consistently. Should my work stay the same or change? If you get into that realm, you'll always be thinking about that. I want to change, but these are pieces on paper that I prime and I tape at the edge. But it was a good period because, again, I lost my fear of being wrong. I think I did. So I just lay down the mark. And the mark was very random, and I hope that something developed. And I was talking to you earlier about Giacometti building, hopefully coming up with something. I overworked myself a lot. I've matured. I've learned to let go and leave stuff alone. Anybody know what that is? That's my tape on my floor of my studio. And my late dog, Jasper, but that's the paper right there. I'll prime that. And I just like showing that. Yes. So, started to kind of go back to look at people like Hoffman, and again, I think the landscape is still in there. And what I became aware of, in a very pleasing way is that as I was freeing myself up to broaden the palette, I could do that, very different, warm, cool to warm. I got a sense that these were places that I had been to. And so what does that mean? Well, you know, one of the things I want to talk about was memory. It's important to me, and I think if you do an abstraction, it's gonna come through somehow, even though you don't always intend it. It might seem like a leap, but going back to those small paintings I showed you right after college, those are documents of a place. I feel that these are as well, but they arrive differently. They're derived differently. These are pretty big paintings, by the way. They're like, you know, 5 feet tall, 6 feet wide. And you can see how important the gesture is. So very aggressive. And I think that was a very successful period for me, like 2000, 2001, 2, 3, 4. Work was selling a lot. The art market hadn't quite changed because of art fairs and the internet and all that crap. But again, you know, you kind of go through these cycles and think, hey, you know, things are happening, and then it's like, oh, maybe it's not happening. And this was just so funny. It's a typical New Yorker cartoon, right? It's incredible. Somebody comes along, you're incredible. By the way, Mike, thank you for the compliment. I would never hear a compliment like, maybe not. Maybe not that great. So why do I feel like such a hack? So I'm showing de Kooning again because I love this piece. It's the artist of Chicago. It's huge. It's called Excavation. It was the first piece he sold at a museum. And I see the figure there. So I was thinking about the influence of surrealism on abstract expressionists. And, you know, that randomness in my paintings was really gestural and aggressive. I kind of pulled away from that, and I started letting the harder edge be more prominent. And as a result, I think they look more figurative. And it got me thinking that God, they're biomorphic and they're kind of peculiar. There's still, I think, a sense of the place because of the colors, perhaps. But it got me curious as to what is it, image-wise, that I'm producing? Does it have a likeness to a thing that I wasn't familiar with? And I do this project with my students called the Creature Project, and I say, you're gonna start with your cube, your cone, your cylinder, your sphere, and you gotta manipulate that. And it becomes this thing, and I think they're as surprised as I am when they come up with this creature. They're kind of grotesque or interesting, fanciful, maybe whimsical. I said, did you ever imagine that was in your head? I said, no. And so I think if you manipulate things like edge or brushstroke, the mark, you can surprise yourself. It's still down to the arrangement of forms. I think I'm very much a formalist. In other words, the design, the arrangement of all the parts that we use is really important to me. I'm grappling with that. You know, people will say, oh, I see this, which I kind of find amusing. Were you thinking this? Do you see that? It's like, I don't see it. I can't see it because I just think of making it. When I look at it, I just think of when I was making it. So this piece, I sold to a friend of mine. He's living in Florida. I went to visit him last year. He pulls out this old-fashioned stick pointer, and he sits me down, and he's going to give me a lecture. So he says that, and he was doing this because he sees it, but he wasn't trying to be a jerk about it. He was just trying to be funny. And he said that he saw a rabbit at a bar having a cocktail. Damn it, you should have said that. My niece at the time was probably about 7 years old. She saw the show that these were. She said, maps. You know, it's like, yeah. So the landscape's still there, not rabbits. Landscape's still there. We're just having more of the aerial perspective, perhaps. And I wanted to show you this because I mentioned working, you know, they changed. It was this, then it was this, ended up like that. They change a lot. Gary probably knows about that. Years change a lot. Gary Pasadena.
Yes,
Yeah.
I am listening.
Yeah.
You ever decide to just turn the different
I mean, I'm glad you brought that up, because I do constantly rotate them. You need to see them in a different way anyway. And, I don't care if you're doing still life. I say to my students, turn that over. I want you to look at your bottle. Your bottle's leaning over. You didn't notice it, did you? Well, same thing with this. You didn't notice that, wow, the green wasn't really working in the lower right corner, whatever. I wanted to point out, though, I'm glad you brought that up, the intention I had for them from the beginning still seems to remain. It's very rare that I'll turn it over, and it's like, oh, I like that better, and I'll leave it that way. The irony of that is clients will buy the painting, and they will turn it as a vertical, or turn it as a horizontal, or turn it upside down.
Is that aggravated?
Initially, I was really shocked by that. I was like, how could you? I got okay with it when the check came in. And B, I realized it's not mine anymore. It's their object. They possess it. They could do with it what they want, can't they? I mean, in a way, how could I say to them, you can't, I'm not Mark Rothko, who would want to buy all his art back for various reasons. I can't go there. I have to let it go. Just have to let it go.
Are these still the same scale?
Yeah, I'm sorry. So about maybe 60 inches high. I wanted to show you this one because speaking of the art market, the yellow.
Banana.
Hello, that's what I meant. Okay, so there's this designer says, oh, I can't show that to the client. I want this painting in their home. Take that out. It looks like a penis. So Dwayne and I were both like, really? So again, to show you that I'm a whore. I was like, fine, I'll take it out. Just paint it, right? Again, I'm adaptable. The point is, I can make it different and it's still going to work. I just don't care. I got to move on. So I just like to bring up these little anecdotes for you guys. As you start to get into this realm eventually, you'll have questions that you'll be confronted with. Yeah.
But what do you mean about you don't care? Because in the making of that, you were caring. You were caring what went there, and you were trying things out and so forth. And then somebody comes along and says, I don't know what penis they're looking at that makes them, I see that as a phallic object, I don't see it as a penis. But banana's closer, but it's not really either, right? It's like, so you're caring at some point, and then you're saying you're not caring in another.
Well, maybe I'm trying to convince myself when I say that. There's a lot of shit in life, and you know how you just how do you deal with the stuff that you don't want in your head? It's like you just got to maybe start with, okay, I don't care, I'm moving on. But yeah, it is a weird experience. I've moved on from it. But at the time, I was questioning, is this a valid thing to do? Or is this an insult?
Yeah.
But I go back to where I have to adapt, and because I teach, I feel that I have to, practice when I'm preaching to the extent that these can change and they can still have value. Maybe this sounds like a rationalization. I think your question is fantastic and it's challenging me, definitely. Yeah.
I think the question that you're talking about, and I'm sure you've done commissions for clients.
Yeah.
When they ask you to remove something like that, at least in my mind, I would reframe it in a way that they're almost asking you to make a painting for them, or the client's asking you to do a commission. So I think in some weird way it could be justified maybe, because I've worked with consultants, they say, can you do more of this here? And then you have to make a decision about whether you're compromising yourself for the piece by doing it, or you're trying to satisfy the client or doing it or whatever.
Yeah. This was unique because it was already done. And to your question, do I care? But I have done things with designers, and I send the image of where it is. She says a little more yellow over here. And I'm like, okay, because I got to be mature.
I don't know.
My students, many of them are graphic design majors or illustration majors. Their job is to do what the client wants them to do, but to retain their individuality and their creativity. So it's not something that I'm used to doing, but
So you're talking about levels of attachment, aren't you? Levels of attachment to what you're and like, so early on you'd be very attached to what you want because you want to make your painting.
Yeah.
And then in some senses, and then you put it very well yourself, once it becomes somebody else's painting, you really have to release that attachment. And that's, I've not thought of this before, but that's sort of a process of giving it away.
Yeah, it is a process. And even returning to this and having a conversation is really actually beneficial. Yeah.
I think changing a painting for a client is, depends how hungry you are. And, you know, make another one, right?
Yeah.
Then it's like how do we, as you mentioned, graphic design artists, we call them artists here, we don't call them graphic designers. And
Right.
they have to, you know, fill the need of the client.
Yeah.
And, you know, we talk about painting and sculpture as some kind of higher finish. But as a practitioner, and knowing you a long time, you're a very productive painter. And I've always admired that about you. And it's just like, fine, I need whatever, $1,000.
Yeah.
Pay the mortgage, and I'll just make another painting, I'll get rid of that painting.
Yeah.
It's gotta go.
Screw you, you know, like this, you know?
So did you change it?
Yeah, I did.
Do you have the image?
Yeah, I
What you
basically,
changed it to?
you know what I did? I was wondering what to do. I scraped it out and I just put some reds in there. You know, and I felt like the other shapes were supporting it well enough. And I didn't have the time to really, you know, belabor it, agonize over it. Yeah. So, a couple of different things to blast through real quick, just talking about process. I've been doing a lot of smaller pieces that are templates for larger ones. So the one on the left here became this again, like that's 60 inches high. And I think, you know, kind of what I would sort of say a surrealist kind of period with the biomorphic shapes. This one is a small one, and I started to reference other artists. This is Avery, because I just started ripping stuff out of Art in America and whatever, and I always forget his name, the guy at top. Anybody remember him?
Who's that?
The guy right here. Oh man, I'm sorry. It'll come to me, of course, later. And so I felt like, okay, I'm not really aping other artists' work, like specific paintings. I'm just taking fragments of their paintings. So I'm a student of painting, and I admire painting, and you know, I want to keep that in what I do. So that was one way that other artists' works influenced me and made it creep in. And I've been working with the line going around the shapes, and that I think further enhances that idea that maybe these are figurative. And I wonder if teaching figure drawing, you know, influences my abstraction. And yet when I look at the color, I can say, well, I still see maybe a map or, you know, water. And I finished all these paintings and all these blues. I thought, yes, these are paintings that are about water. You know, like this could be a wave or a crash of water. Definitely not here. So again, they're all about the same size. And so, I'll try to wrap up here, see if we got a few questions. But I saw the show at MoMA, and I remember running into Jeff and Tom in Chelsea that year. It was a CAA conference. And back to my first few comments about does abstraction matter, I was very pleased, I guess, or relieved that there was this show at MoMA of abstract painters doing these big things. And that, you know, there's this embrace, respect for it, hadn't been discarded. Not just art market stuff, I'm talking about Museum of Modern Art, you know, a big deal. Exploration of contemporary artists, many of whom were young or middle-aged. And a few of the artists whose work I like were this guy from Colombia, Oscar Murillo. He's big, really popular on Instagram. People love posting his stuff. He doesn't have his own account as far as I know. But there's the mark. Very clever. I think that what happened is the world became smaller, and artists from Colombia and Ethiopia and Germany or wherever who loved abstract expressionism and the mark, they just went with it. They didn't have any rules. There wasn't somebody at their art college or a museum saying, don't do that. It's cliche, you know. And because I think people became more open-minded what's going on out there in the world, and they embraced artists from different cultures, it revalidated, if you will, what this is. And I think it further entrenches the importance, the significance, the weight of the mark making and abstraction, and its meaning as an expressive form. This is artist, do you guys know her? She's Julie Moretu, I don't know if I pronounced her name right. She's from Ethiopia.
Yes.
It's a massive piece. We have one of her pieces. We have a small one at the museum. It's about as big as a string. And of course, she's up on that skyjack thing. And she's working on something new also. I think this might be what she's still working on. It's like so huge. Huge. And Charlene von Heil, who's German. More irony in her work, I think, but I still liked it compared to Oscar Maria. This is Cecily Brown. This was in the show in Chelsea. I don't know if you remember this show, Jeff, but I read it to you guys. She's an English painter. Does these massive things, and they're very much figurative, kind of influenced by some of de Kooning's figurative pieces with the brushwork, and they're kind of violent and very sexual. And so, this is some works from 2015 from about that year, and I was just feeling good about painting again in a way I hadn't. I've been working with stencils as a way to kind of activate space, and also just working with smaller templates. And some of the stuff I've been doing, these are smaller, I've been collaging and using the stencil. And again, I just feel it's a way to inform my paintings, to reveal influences in a different way than just saying, well, oh, you paint like Hoffman because you use blocky reds and yellows, Well, I'm influenced by Warhol. Why don't I put a Warhol self-portrait in there, I like these because it makes me not overwork them too. They're smaller, and here's an arrangement of shapes, and we'll just leave it as is.
Probably got them.
Yeah, sorry. And another big one. So you can see where I'm going with the stencils. This is from 2018. And finally, this is another small one. And I realized, well, I'm really enjoying doing these small ones. I don't know where the hell I'm going with it. So when I did my residency, I decided to take a video projector, project the image onto the canvas, trace around it. Here's a different way I'm approaching the mark. And then I filled it in. So I took the stencil shape, which is done with a laser cutter, and then I drew it, and now it's mine. It's just another way I'm thinking about the mark. And I don't know where I'm going with this, but there's another one, and that's the studio. So I just stretched them, but I did those four and a couple others at the residency. That's where I am now. So closing with thought for you art students: the greater the artist, the greater the doubt. Perfect confidence is greater than the less talent. It's a constellation prize, which is on my door. I exit my studio every day. I'm great. I'm awesome. Oh wait, maybe I'm not. So if you want to find me on Instagram, Smith Abstract Art. I'm sorry I went a little over. Thank you. Thank you. I guess we have 1 minute per question.
Yeah, we can have a quick.
Yeah.
As a prolific abstract artist, do you find yourself straying away from titling your work or leaning into it?
Say it again.
As a prolific abstract artist, do you find yourself leaning away from titling your work, or is that something that
I do title it after the finish. It was one thing I thought about mentioning, but I obviously didn't get to it. But I do title it afterwards. Many of our pieces are titled after places in the world because I feel like they remind me of a place. So it's like a Ouija board. I pull out my atlas. So if I feel like this is Northern Europe or this is California or this is Mexico, I look on that map and I just like the lyrical quality of certain words and I apply it to the painting. I try not to overthink it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
That's great.
Okay.